Hey, so first of all, just cool to meet you. You're a hell of a good pilot, and I really love your shit. So I'll just get that right out of the way.
Appreciate it. It's nice to meet you too. And do you go by Joshua,
I
JB,
do.
Josh? Okay, Joshua.
Some people, I have started. People have started calling me JB because there's a couple other Joshes or Joshuas in the local Knoxville group, so we've
Uh,
had to start, discriminating. But yeah, Joshua's fine.
okay.
Yeah, that's what I usually go by. Um, so here's the pretext for the call today. Stingy and I, we were together at a trip, and we were like, well, we're here, we should shoot a video. So we actually, Rotor Riot has a list of like video ideas that
hmm
just we think would make good videos, and just anytime you don't know what to do, you just look at the list and pull something off the list. And so we picked flying in other modes, right? Because we fly mode 2.
Yep.
And so we decided to try mode 1 and mode 3. I did mode 3, he did mode 1. And we said, here's we're gonna show him how to convert the radio to mode. Oh, so we got a little technical aspect, and then we're gonna fly, and we're gonna see if over the course of maybe a 3 or 4 hour shooting day, we can get good, and we'll like have a race or a contest. Not even close. And we said we said let's just do this in the simulator because then we could just reset, and that's super lame, right? So we did
Yeah.
it in real life with our actual quads, and we were terrible. It was actually terrifying because like the quad just would not do what my brain wanted it to do. It just refused.
Yep.
Um, so, so one of the things we want to do for the episode is talk to some people who fly in other modes than Mode 2, which in the U.S. is certainly the most popular. And
hmm
you famously, or I don't know if it's famous, but you fly Mode 3, right?
Yes, I am a weirdo, so I do
Okay,
fly mode 3.
so tell us what Mode 3 is, first of all, how it compares to Mode 2 that most people are probably flying.
Okay. So basically, mode 3 is essentially having throttle and yaw on the right stick, and then pitch and roll on the left stick. And that's essentially what mode 3 is.
So it's if I got this right, it's basically Mode 2, but you flip the sticks,
Yep.
or do we only flip? Yeah. So yeah. So basically, and I thought, how hard could this be? I mean, I know how to fly a quad. I know what the sticks should do. I'll just take it slow, and I'll just know that my sticks are reversed, and my left hand will do what my right hand would do. And the problem I had was that my brain and my fingers know what to do before I consciously am aware of it. So, like I told you this earlier, I'd be like, oh, I'm climbing. I need to throttle down. And by the time I had thought, okay, throttle down, right hand, throttle down, the quad had already pitched back because, like, my eyes went, oh, I need to pitch back. Anyway, it was actually worse, I think, than when I was first learning because I had all these bad habits, good habits, but not habits consistent with Mode 3. Have you tried to fly in other modes than Mode 3?
Yeah, I have. I gave mode 2 a shot just because it is the more popular mode and more common mode in the US, so I did give that a shot. Um, I personally didn't enjoy the flight experience, but I think what you just hit on is really key is that you're used to what you're used to. And when you change something, the dynamics change of how the flight characteristics are. So I think it had more to do with me not being as familiar than than it actually was a disadvantage or advantage, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So what made you when you were first learning? Why did you end up on Mode 3 instead of like Mode 2, like many people do?
Okay. So you have to. Okay. So I'm gonna take you back to 3 years ago.
Okay.
3 years
Okay.
ago, and stick with me because
Okay.
you probably know this more than anyone.
All
We
right.
didn't have many resources, right? 3 years ago, right? You did a great
Yep.
job kind of educating people over time,
I
and
was
so
just
did
I was just getting started 3 years ago. It was
yeah.
all RC groups.
Yep.
Good luck.
Yep, exactly. And me not having, I don't have an RC background at all. So I was like, okay, well, I want to get into this drone racing deal. And the first thing that I needed was a radio. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about, at this point, I don't know anything about what's common, what's not common. Um, so it's completely looking at it from a new view and not taking any considerations when you make this decision.
Hmm.
So what I thought to myself was, well, I'm right-handed. When I started the hobby, I thought, well, what's the most important aspect of flying? And what I said to myself was throttle. Throttle control is key. It makes the quad go faster, up, down. So I personally would want that on my dominant hand. And that's essentially where I started at. Now, in terms of yaw movement, at this basic stage 3 years ago, what I would say is, well, yaw turns your quad, right? So let me
Hmm.
just grab mine. So it turns your quad. So in my opinion, when I want to go somewhere in terms of flight line, it's yaw that's being inputted. So I will want that on my dominant hand as well. So
Okay.
that, obviously you could use roll and other inputs to move your quad, but at the time,
Right.
it's very basic to me. And I was like, okay, well, this makes most sense. I want those two inputs on my right hand, and whatever my left hand could handle, I'm just gonna put the rest of my left hand.
Okay. So you started out you just kind of thought about how you thought the controls should be, and that's how you ended up, based on your dominant hand and the most important. You tried to put the most important things on your right hand.
Yes.
So now it's years later, and you're obviously a great pilot. How do you feel about that decision in retrospect?
Um, I think that there's advantages to that decision and disadvantages. So, uh, obviously, us touch on the disadvantage. Um, you're not going to be, to me, it's not going to be an easy path to being a pro pilot, because all the radio systems that are not racing drones, like it's not your Tyrannus, are Mode 2 in the US. So you're at that
You mean like
disadvantage. Yeah, go
you
ahead.
mean like a bind and fly or a fixed wing? What do you mean? All the other racing radio systems?
So, for instance, if you go to any shop, or if you get hired by a company to
I got you.
drive their equipment, the equipment is probably going to be in Mode 2,
Right.
right? So you're at a
Yep.
disadvantage from that perspective to make professional money. Um, but to me, it's more about having fun. I really don't, pay too much mind to that aspect of it. But if you are wanting to get into a professional state, that is something definitely to consider. Is that Mode 2
Yeah.
is going to be the most common across multiple industries and
Yeah.
countries.
Certainly in the U.S. and I think also in Europe. Although I can't ever figure out where I know there's parts of the world where Mode One is more popular, or maybe that's not even true anymore. I think the internet has sort of democratized the world in a sense that there's not as many sort of little pockets, especially in mini quads. In fixed wings, maybe it's different, but
Yeah.
for FPV and mini quads, everybody's just on the internet and kind of doing the same thing. I know there's people out there who fly Mode One, but I think it's got to be like I don't know, 80%, 85% of people in the world fly Mode 2. I'm just guessing. It's a
No,
lot.
no, I agree with you. I think the big thing is that, okay, so if you want to be in a professional state making money with bigger companies, um, where is that demand, or that
Right.
need? So US is great for that need, because I've talked to other people outside this country, and they just can't find jobs that deal with drone pilots. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of companies out in the US that want drone pilots to, there's more than usual. Um,
Right.
so it's just something to consider, I guess.
Have you ever run into a situation like at an event? I don't know if you go to a lot of events like Flight Fest or Rampage or the International Open, where somebody's like, "Hey, can I check out your quad?" Or they're like, "Hey, you want? I got a 7-inch X class," and they're like, "Here, check it out." And you're like, "Have you run into
Um,
that?"
I I generally don't like flying other people's equipment, so I kind of stay away from that fray. But um, what I would say is that if you're running a crossfire system, it's easy to switch out the module, the back into
Ooh.
the module, right? And then you could just put the module into your Tyrannus, and you're good to go. right?
That's really interesting.
So
That's really interesting. You're right about that. Actually, and Stingy did that because we set my radio up to have throttle on the right. And
mhm,
then when he took over for mode one, throttle's also on the right. We just had to flip yaw and roll. And he just pulled his crossfire module out of his radio and slapped it on my radio. And it was easy for him to fly his own quad, in other
yeah.
words. So that's interesting. That's
So
worth
th-
yeah.
there's that workaround. The other thing that I think I went to a kind of a meetup couple of months ago, and everyone everyone wanted to kind of fly what my quad felt like because it was tuned
Right.
well, and it was really
Right.
hard to do that to let them fly it because my transmitter. I'm open to letting people test my stuff out.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me, but
They just can't do it.
yeah. And at
Yeah.
that point in time, I don't think anyone was familiar with Crossfire as they are now. So it was
Yeah.
less common a few months
You
ago.
could set up two models. You could copy your model and you could just like switch it, couldn't you? No, because your throttle's your spring loaded. It's a
Yeah,
hardware change. Your
yeah,
throttle is still on the right, and that's not easy. Something that's easy to undo in the spur of
yeah,
the moment. And it really makes me appreciate radios like the X Lite, and I'm pretty sure the Spectrum radios do this as well, where they have screws you can access from the back of the radio, so you don't have to open the radio to change the throttle spring. I never thought that would be. When I was opening my radio up in the middle of a hotel room to take the spring off the throttle, I was like, I wish I had an X Lite right now. But so I wonder. So now that you are a better pilot, do you still think there's an advantage to having the most important controls on your dominant hand? Do you find that one of your hands is more precise than the other?
um, so yeah, that's pretty much the biggest advantage, right? Is that I'm going to be a little bit more precise because it's on my dominant hand. In terms of if you consider yaw, flight lanes, right? Flight lines, and then throttle control. The one thing I will say is that like I'm pretty good with yaw movements because it's on my right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I care less about pitch and roll just because that's more rates in my opinion than anything else.
Interesting.
So I think that right now I would say that's the biggest advantage that you're gonna have better um, ability to adjust your flight lines in flight than if you would on your left hand. Now that's all subjective, right? Because you know
Yeah.
what you know. So yeah, you would have to test out both
Certainly,
and know. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, I'm left hand. I happen to be one of the lucky left-handed people in the world. So when I fly mode two, in fact, throttle and yaw are on my dominant hand.
yeah,
But a whole lot of right-handed people out there are flying mode two, and well, once you've become skilled at it, I think switching is going to really mess you up.
yeah.
I wonder if you would recommend somebody starting out right now who's right-handed, whether you would say, "No, buck the trend, fly mode three, learn if you hadn't already learned," or would you say, "Nah, fly mode two, just stick with what everybody else is doing"?
I would personally say that it depends what your goals are because so for me, going back 3 years ago, there weren't that many people that were doing trick tutorials and things of that nature with stick
Right,
cam, right? And there was even less people flying mode three. So
right,
right, so
right.
there wasn't that ability to learn easy. So I would study the approach of certain things I wanted to do rather than just look at the input because the inputs wouldn't do me any good.
That's
So
a good point. Yeah. I mean, today on the internet, we've got a lot of people doing stick cam, or I do stick overlays with black box. If you have the raw black box file, it's actually a setting in black box viewer that you can change to change it from displaying mode. It doesn't matter what mode the pilot flew it in. Black
yeah,
box viewer can actually display it in any mode you want. But if you're looking at like a literal stick cam or something that's pre-rendered, it's probably going to be in mode 2. And if you're used to mode 1, you'll either have to learn to mentally translate. I guess it's not too hard. You just flip the sticks. But it is going to, I think of it as if you actually are getting instruction. And I don't know how many people learn FPV from instructors. I think a lot of us are self taught or simulator taught. And so this idea that you need to be in mode 2 because your instructor is going to be in mode 2, I'm not sure how much that actually holds today.
well let me ask you this question. Going back 3 years ago when you started the hobby, and if you didn't know anything about the hobby, and you're like, well, what should I select? How would you go
Yeah.
about doing it?
I mean, I just flew whatever came on my radio. I happened to buy a Mode 2 radio. I might have researched it a little. The argument I've always made is that I like to make a musical instrument analogy, which is that if you learn to play guitar and you learn to play a left handed guitar, then anytime you're at a music festival or a jam or you're just over at your friend's house and somebody pulls out a guitar, you can't play it.
Yep.
So I make the argument that that social aspect is more important than any potential technical advantage that you would get from like flying mode 3. I want to be able to go to Rampage and pick up somebody's transmitter and fly their quad if that's what I want to do. Um, I also make the argument that nobody, lots of left-handed people play right-handed guitar. Your both hands are doing something complicated. You figure it out. And there's almost no such thing in the world as a left-handed piano. So does it really matter? I don't know. That's the counter argument I like to make. What do you? And I've made those. I didn't just come up with those. I've made those arguments before. What do you think of those arguments as a avowed Mode 3 pilot?
Um, they're becoming less valid, just because one thing we just talked about was the ability for Crossfire to switch, take it out of one transfer and put it in another. So it's less valid from that perspective, because there's technology that enables you to do it quicker and faster, and you're dealing with your own radio, so you're not risking damaging another person's equipment
Mm-hmm.
as much, right? So as technology grows going forward, I would expect it become even more easier to kind of switch it around. Now, 3 years ago, I would have completely agree with you and say, like, look, there's no way that you're going to be switching things in the field. You need to you need to fly what other people are flying if you want the ability, that social ability, or if
Mm-hmm.
you want to make improvements very quickly because the resources are very limited. The people who are using this stuff are flying mode 2. So I would say that. Now, as for me, as it pertains to me, the decision, I wouldn't go back on my decision, or I wouldn't change it. I would still approach it the same way, just because I'm that. I don't know. I'm very like technical when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
like decision making, so I don't really
Mm-hmm.
listen to what the commonality is. I'm like, okay, well, what makes sense for me? And what
Right.
I would say is that always do what you're comfortable doing and what the equipment you are comfortable flying with. Don't, I mean,
Yeah.
just because someone picks up something, I had few people ask me like, hey, how do you get into mode 3? I'm like, how long have you been flying mode 2? And
Right.
and I was like, well, you've been flying for a year, so why give that up? Why give that experience up just because you think that you could fly better with Mode 3,
Yeah.
right?
There's certainly you're, and let me say, if you decide to do that, from my experience shooting this episode with Stingy, if you decide to do that, definitely start in the simulator because it's like you know how before you take off, and you probably do this, I guess, especially if you have a bottom mount battery. Before you take off, you kind of like level the quad and you kind of pitch forward a little, and then you raise the throttle and go. I couldn't even do that. Like the quad was facing this way and I wanted to take off this way and I start to yaw but then it rolls and I start to roll. I couldn't even just like settle the quad and get it in the air. And this is after like an hour of practice and I'm not a bad pilot. I just couldn't do it. So yeah, it's going to hurt you to switch.
Yeah, don't give up your experience. That'll be my only thing. And if you're thinking about making it into a professional state, Mode 2 would probably be the best,
Yeah.
easiest path. I would say.
That's a that's actually a great art. You know, I've argued about learning from an instructor, but I never thought about the professional state. Like, if you get to a point where people are going to want to pay you to fly, whether it's trick tutorials or quad camp, or whether you are just flying an industrial drone or a camera drone for a movie shoot, that's all going to be mode 2. Um, what about pilots who fly in multiple modes? They're out there. There's a lot of guys that, maybe not a lot, but they fly mode 1 and mode 2. They like learn in mode 1, but they learn mode 2 for the reasons we've talked about. Are you ever motivated to really muscle through and pick up mode 2?
I know one. I mean, I know Chad Nowak does that. He actually could
Right.
switch back and forth. But for me, I don't. I think that when you try to be well versed in multiple areas, it's very difficult to be great in one area, right?
Interesting.
So you're giving up your time. You could be really good at you could have something that you're really good at and be great at it, but if you're okay across four realms, then you're not going
Right.
to be specialized in one, right? So I would say probably stick with whatever you're comfortable with and just build on that. I personally wouldn't switch around like that because there's a lot of things that a lot of nuances that happen when your brain is you're gonna have to think more about your inputs, and then that's gonna
I,
result in crashing.
I and I have to say I understand that better than I ever did. I never knew how much of what I do when I'm flying has become subconscious until I tried to override it consciously. And the quad just kept doing things that I never told it to do. Except when I look back at the stick cam, I can see I'm moving my, and I don't remember doing it. So yeah, you've got a lot of that to build on, and yeah, cool. There's one other thing that I'm curious about, and you and I both, I tried mode 3 and I fly mode 2, and so I just flipped the sticks. But my throttle and my yaw were always on the same stick, and my pitch and my roll are always on the same stick. And I've wondered if there is an advantage to or disadvantage to doing it the other way, having throttle shared with roll and pitch shared with yaw. For example, I seldom do any full deflection yaw moves. Maybe that's because I fly mode 2. Because when I'm controlling the throttle, I don't like to deflect the yaw too much because I lose throttle control. I lose precision. Um, I don't know. Since you and I are in the same boat, whether I don't know. Do you have any thought about whether there's an advantage to putting yaw and throttle together versus roll and throttle?
No, no, I hear what you're saying. What I'm thinking about is a couple of things here. So when you're blipping the throttle, right, which is
Mm-hmm.
pretty common when you do like a snap movement, like a roll or something, right, through a gap, for instance, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
very disadvantaged. It's going to be a huge disadvantage because when you blip it, your throttle's going to be all the way up, and then you're going to have to go roll or go that way. Like it's going to be
Right.
very tough. So you have to think about what type of movements you want to be really good at, and what type of movements you don't. You could be normal in, or average in, I should say. So,
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
I guess my personal um, opinion is that the reason I'm so precise with my yaw movements is because it's on my dominant hand, and
That's That's what I wanted to ask because one of the moves you do that really impresses me is your yaw spin, and it's a full, I assume it's full deflect. I mean, it's pretty fast, so I'm guessing it's close to full deflection. Now, when you do that, you're inverted, so the
mm,
throttle is down, right? You lower the throttle and then yaw,
yeah,
or is the throttle raised still?
the throttle is at a low point when I do it.
Right,
Yes, yeah.
right. So that in that move, the throttle comes down and then deflects.
Yep.
Um, So you're not really at a situation. I guess the place where I guess it's true for mode. What's your yaw rate?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know.
do you know your
I what's up?
Do you know the degrees per second?
No, I don't pay
Wow.
attention to any of that because the reason why I don't. Well, this is just personal opinion. The reason why I
Okay.
don't pay attention to any of that stuff is because it depends on the size of the quad. So all those numbers are out the door because it's all simulated numbers. If the quad's bigger, it's going to roll right slower,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
if you have fatter props. So if you have like,
You're
for instance,
100% right.
yeah. So if I just switched to these S3 props and I actually had to drop my rates down a little bit because my roll was extremely quick before I was flying Doll Cyclones, which are more of a fatter prop and a higher pitch
Hmm.
prop. So all that stuff to me, I don't pay attention to. I pay attention to line of sight, what am I seeing, and then I look at the video saying, okay, how slow do I want it? How quick do I want it? Does it look too quick? So just things that I've picked up over the years. I don't really pay attention to the numbers right now, at least. I used to, but I just don't do it anymore.
Yeah. I'm guessing that I mean your moves are extremely precise. Some of your favorite moves, some of the moves you do that are my favorites are the look back, where you'll just hit that horizon every time, or the inverted yaw spin, where in order to get that perfect circle, you have to rotate to the exact right angle, and you just seem to nail them. And I'm guessing that means you've got this muscle memory just down, and you just adjust the quad's rates until it hits what your fingers are used to doing.
Yeah, that's about. I mean, that's about it. I would say you can't. Okay, so one thing I will say is that you cannot trust your FPV cam. So, so if because it makes sense because your FPV cam's tilted, right?
Right.
And if you trust it, then that movements can be very difficult to judge. So I go by my stick inputs. Like I could do an inverted yaw and have my eyes closed and it'll be fine because I know,
Right.
right? I'm not looking at the cam and saying, okay, well, am I flat or not? Like I'm feeling the sticks. I don't know if
No,
that
you
makes
can't.
yeah.
No, I know exactly what you mean. If you try, let's say that somebody tries to do let's take an easy move like a 180 backflip, right? So
Hmm.
you want to have the horizon dead center on the screen when you do that
Yep.
backflip. If you do it slowly, you could just stop with you just watch the horizon come around and stop. But if
Yep.
you're going to do a snap move,
Yep.
it's going too fast. You're not
Yep.
going to hit it. You just need to learn how fast to move the stick to get that. But then, as you're pointing out, your setup needs to be absolutely consistent, right? So all your quads need to have a consistent up tilt. What up tilt do you fly, by the way? I
Uh,
don't know if you've discussed your
25.
setup with other people, but yeah, I'd be curious. 25? Yeah.
Yeah. So I this is kind of my go-to right now. So this is like a
Mm-hmm.
25 Fox Shear Predator 1.8 lens.
Mm-hmm.
I like kind of the field of view of that, and then this is basically matching that. But
Good
that's basically what I'm doing.
old school GoPro foam.
Yep.
What's the frame? What's the frame?
This is a
I couldn't quite tell.
4.5 Alien from Impulse RC. I I have the reverb here. Yep, this is I have the reverb. It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah,
In terms of
they're
like
very similar.
yeah, very similar, but I like the OG look of the Alien, so I've been flying that right now.
You and Mr. Steele. Does he still fly the Alien? I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, he
I don't
does.
know if he's yeah OG.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, but I'll say this. One of the things that stands out to me about Steele is I remember when he was in Houston with us for Quad Camp, and I'm not sure if that was the first time he tried 6S low KV, but Neil Whiteley was there, and we were testing some of his 6S low KV rigs, and Steele flew or watched. I can't remember if he flew one, but I think he called Trappy up and was like, "Hey, make me a 1650 kV wind to my motor. I want to try this out." And he shortly after that he did go to 6S, but before that he had been flying the same setup, like the exact same motors, batteries. He doesn't change a thing about his setup because and I think you're the same way, he wants a very consistent, repeatable precision from his experience that you can't get if you're changing your setup. And even things like changing frames can really throw that off.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think if you're a new pilot, rather than jump on the hype and just get every single motor that's being thrown every month, or buying every frame that's released, stick to one setup that has backing from people that have flown for quite a
Right.
while, and yeah, progress that way and don't waver from it. Just stick with it because a lot of this doesn't have to do with having the newest motors or the newest FPV camera or the newest frame. It has to do with experience with the same setup. So
And, and that brings us back to where we started the conversation, which is your flight mode or your transmitter mode. Whatever you're flying, I guess your advice would be, you know, pick one, then stick with it, and you'll probably be all right.
yeah, I mean, there's going to be disadvantages, advantages for everything, but I would, if I were to say a new pilot what they should learn right now, I would say mode two just to cover your bases, because it's going to be the
Okay.
easiest path to learning your quad. Now, if you want to experiment along the way, that's fine, because we all get bored and we all want to kind of tinker around, right?
Yeah.
So it's all good if you want to just take a leap into something new, but if you're trying to make this in a professional state, like some pilots are when they get into this hobby, I would say Mode 2.
Awesome. Cool, Vic. That's I think that's it for me. I appreciate your time. It's been nice talking to you.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, that's
That's
that's all I got. They'll probably use like 2 minutes of that in the actual episode, but I'll probably after they release the episode and just throw most of this out. I'll probably post because I think this interview, I think people will be interested in it. I'll probably post the rest of it to my channel so it won't go to waste. I really appreciate it. It's been nice talking to you.
Hey, it's nice talking to you. And if you want to talk about anything else, yeah, just
All
let me
right,
know. Keep in touch.
awesome. All
All
right,
right,
thanks,
man.
man. Later.
See ya.